High in the Peruvian Andes, the Cordillera Huayhuash rises in sharp, folded lines of snow and stone. The peaks stand isolated from roads and villages. Wind moves without obstruction across the ice. Weather forms quickly and leaves slowly. For much of the year, the mountains remain locked in cold. Sula Grande stands at 6,344 meters. Its west face falls away in broken walls of snow, ice, and dark rock. The glaciers below are creased and unstable. Seracs lean over open spaces. Cornices hang over air. In 1985, this part of Peru saw few climbers. Expeditions were small. Communication with the outside world was limited. Once a team moved beyond the last grazing paths and into the glacier basin, retreat became complex. Rescue, if needed, would not be immediate. Above base camp, the mountain is silent except for wind and shifting ice. There are no trees, no soil, no sound of water. Only snow layered over older snow, compressed into ice. On these slopes, survival depends on precision. A misplaced step can break through a crust into nothing. A rope must hold. A knot must remain secure. Decisions are made slowly, because the mountain does not respond to urgency. Everything here is white, blue, or stone gray. Cold defines the landscape. It does not threaten at first. It simply exists. In 1985, I was 25 years old. I had already spent years climbing in the Alps and in the greater ranges. Technical routes, winter ascents, steep ice faces. Climbing was not a hobby. It was a discipline built slowly through repetition and exposure. Movement on ice had become familiar. Decision-making under pressure was part of the work. I had grown up in the north of England. Like many British climbers of that period, I learned on cold rock and wet conditions. The weather was rarely stable. The terrain demanded patience. There were no large support teams, no commercial infrastructure. Climbers relied on each other. By the mid-1980s, the greater ranges drew attention. The Andes offered technical objectives that were less crowded than the Himalaya. Information was limited. Maps were incomplete. Success depended on preparation and self-sufficiency. Kevin Ward was 22. He was strong, quiet, and methodical. He had experience in the Alps and on difficult ice routes. We had climbed together before. Trust had been built gradually, through shared routes and long days on exposed ground. In high mountains, partnership is measured by consistency rather than words. Our plan was direct and simple. Attempt a new route on the previously unclimbed west face of Sula Grande. Climb in alpine style. Carry what we needed. Fix no ropes in advance. Establish no stocked camps on the face. Move upward with what we could carry, and descend the same way. This approach required speed and restraint. Equipment was limited. Food was measured carefully. We carried a small tent for use higher on the mountain, fuel for melting snow, ropes, ice screws, rock protection, and basic medical supplies. Nothing extra. The mountain had been climbed before by other routes. The west face, however, remained untouched. From base camp, it appeared steep and direct. Snowfields broken by rock bands. Sections of vertical ice. Long stretches exposed to wind. The decision to attempt it was deliberate. We understood the commitment involved. There would be no established line of retreat. Once committed to the upper face, descent options would narrow. Weather windows in the range could close without warning. There was no expectation of rescue if something went wrong. Satellite communication did not exist for climbers in 1985. Radio contact was unreliable. Beyond base camp, we would be alone. We moved toward the face knowing that the climb would require precision and endurance. There was no intention of risk for its own sake. The objective was clarity of movement and completion of a direct line. The mountain did not promise difficulty. It presented terrain. Snow over ice. Ice over rock. Height over distance. We began the approach with measured pace. Every step from that point would take place in snow. We reached the Cordillera Huayhuash after days of travel from Lima. Supplies were transported by mule to the edge of the glacier. Beyond that point, everything moved on our backs. The air thinned steadily as we gained height. Snow began where grass ended, and from there the landscape remained frozen. Base camp was established on moraine below Sulla Grande. The ground was not soil but rock and packed ice. Each morning began with frost inside the tent. Water came from melting snow. The mountain stood above us in full view, its west face marked by vertical bands of ice and wind-scoured ridges. The weather in the range followed a pattern. Clear mornings. Cloud building in the afternoon. Occasional storms moving in from the Pacific. Temperatures remained below freezing at night. Even during the day, exposed surfaces stayed hard. We spent time observing the face. Avalanches moved down certain channels in the afternoon sun. Cornices cast long shadows along the upper ridge. The line we intended to climb cut through a central weakness in the wall, avoiding the largest overhangs of ice. There were no other teams on the route. No tracks in the snow above base camp. The isolation was complete. Once we stepped onto the glacier and began the climb, there would be no external contact until we returned. Equipment was checked repeatedly. Ropes were coiled and recoiled. Ice screws counted. Fuel rationed. Every item had a purpose. Excess weight was avoided. The decision to begin came after a stable weather window appeared. The sky cleared. Wind dropped. The face remained firm and cold. Conditions were as favorable as they were likely to become. We left base camp carrying food for several days, a small tent, stove, and climbing hardware. The snow underfoot was hard in the early hours. Each step required deliberate placement. By midday, we were on the lower slopes of the west face. Above us, the route narrowed into steeper ice. Below us, the glacier spread outward in silent white. From that point forward, retreat would depend on the same ground we climbed. We climbed the west face over several days. The snowfields were firm in the mornings and unstable by afternoon. Ice sections required front pointing for long stretches. Protection was placed carefully. Progress was steady. There were no sudden crises during the ascent. We reached the summit ridge in clear weather. The top of Sulla Grande was narrow and exposed, edged by cornices that curved outward over open space. There was no extended stay. At that altitude, time is limited. We began the descent soon after. Descending a new route is more complex than climbing upward. Anchors must be built from available snow or ice. Rappels are made into unknown terrain. Each rope length reveals ground not previously examined from below. The upper sections required repeated abseils down steep ice. The rope ran through snow bollards and ice threads. Movement was controlled and methodical. There was no indication of instability beyond what is normal in high mountains. The accident occurred during one of these descents. I was moving down a steep section when my right foot slipped unexpectedly. The surface beneath the snow was hard blue ice. My balance shifted outward. The rope took tension abruptly. The fall was not long, but the impact was direct. I struck the slope and felt a sharp break in my lower right leg. The fracture was immediate and unmistakable. I remained suspended on the rope, unable to place weight on the leg. There was no shelter on that section of the face. Only a narrow stance carved into snow and ice. Kevin secured the rope and descended to me. The leg was unstable below the knee. Movement produced visible displacement. There was no realistic option to climb back upward. We assessed the situation without urgency. The summit ridge was above. The glacier basin was far below. We were still high on the west face, suspended between sections of steep ice and rock bands. Retreat would require controlled lowering down the same route. The terrain did not allow for an easy traverse to another descent line. There was no external assistance available. The mountain remained unchanged. The snow continued to drift lightly across the face. Wind moved along the ridge above. From that moment, the climb had ended. Descent became survival. The fracture prevented me from descending independently. Weight could not be placed on the leg. The only workable method was controlled lowering. Kevin remained above, anchored securely in snow and ice. I positioned myself below him on the rope. He would lower me one rope length at a time. Then he would descend to my position. The process would repeat. Each anchor had to hold full body weight during transfer. Snow bollards were carved carefully. Ice screws were placed where the surface allowed. The rope ran through carabiners to reduce friction. Communication was minimal and direct. Wind carried sound away quickly. The descent was slow. Every movement required coordination. When lowered, I used my arms and one functioning leg to maintain balance against the slope. The broken leg trailed, supported loosely. Pain remained constant but manageable in the cold air. Terrain grew steeper in sections. At times the rope did not reach safe ledges. Kevin extended anchors where possible, then moved down to me with controlled precision. There was no wasted motion. Energy was conserved deliberately. Visibility shifted through the afternoon. Light flattened the surface of the snow. Depth perception narrowed. We remained suspended high above the glacier basin, with hundreds of meters still below. At one point, I was lowered over what appeared to be a smooth roll in the face. The rope fed steadily from above. My feet touched snow, then nothing. The slope curved outward into space. I found myself hanging free. Below me was a crevasse hidden by the contour of the face. Its opening had not been visible from above. The rope continued downward, but there was no surface beneath my feet. I shouted upward. The wind distorted the sound. The rope tightened slightly, then stopped. Kevin could not see me from his position. I was hanging in open air, suspended over a void. There was no ledge to stand on. No immediate way to climb back up with one leg unusable. The rope between us was stretched tight across the lip of the crevasse. The snow above remained intact. The glacier below was still far beneath. For the first time since the fall, there was no clear continuation. I remained suspended below the overhang, hanging free above the crevasse. The rope ran upward across the lip of the snow and ice. I could not see Kevin. He could not see me. Communication was limited to brief shouts carried by wind. From his position, the rope had gone tight. He had no visual confirmation of my condition. Snow anchors were holding, but only under constant tension. He could not safely descend toward the edge without compromising the anchor system. If he moved forward and the snow failed, both of us would fall. I attempted to gain purchase against the wall of the crevasse, but the sides were smooth and vertical. With one leg broken and swinging, upward movement was not realistic. The rope was my only support. Time passed in that suspended position. The temperature dropped as light faded. Snow crystals moved across the face in steady wind. The rope remained under load, cutting gradually into the lip of the overhang. From above, the situation presented a single fact: the rope was fixed and immovable. There was no visible progress. The anchor would not hold indefinitely under a static, unseen load. If the rope severed under tension against the ice edge, the result would be immediate. Kevin made a decision based on limited information. Believing I had fallen into an unrecoverable crevasse and that the rope was irretrievably jammed, he cut it. The tension released instantly. I dropped through open air into the crevasse below. The fall was long enough to remove orientation, but short enough to avoid terminal impact. I struck a sloping snow bridge deep inside the crevasse. The snow absorbed part of the force. I continued sliding and came to rest on a narrow platform of packed snow and ice. There was no light from above except a thin blue opening far overhead. The rope no longer connected us. I was alone inside the glacier. The fall ended on a sloping shelf inside the crevasse. Snow filled part of the chamber. Light entered from a narrow opening far above, tinted blue by compressed ice. The walls were smooth and vertical. The space was silent. I assessed my condition first. The broken leg remained unstable but intact. There were no additional fractures that I could detect. My helmet had held. My ice tools were still attached to my harness. The rope above was gone. Climbing directly upward through the crevasse was not possible. The walls were steep and overhanging near the top. I began searching laterally for an exit. Crevasses branch beneath glaciers in irregular patterns. Some reconnect with the surface through snow bridges or sloping corridors. Movement required using both arms and the single functional leg. I dragged the injured leg carefully to avoid further displacement. Progress was slow. Snow shifted beneath weight. Ice tools were placed into firm sections to maintain balance. The interior of the glacier formed a system of narrow passages. Some ended abruptly. Others descended deeper. I avoided downward paths where possible. Cold intensified away from direct light. Time became difficult to measure. Eventually, I located a narrow upward ramp of compacted snow leading toward a thin seam of daylight. The angle was steep but climbable. Using the ice tools for support and pushing with the uninjured leg, I advanced gradually. Reaching the surface required sustained effort. Each meter gained risked collapse of unstable snow. There was no margin for haste. After extended movement, I emerged onto the glacier surface below the west face. The mountain stood above in full exposure. Wind moved steadily across the basin. There was no sign of Kevin on the face. From that distance, no movement could be distinguished. Base camp lay several kilometers away across broken glacier and moraine. With one leg unusable, standing upright was difficult. Walking was not possible in a conventional sense. The only viable option was to begin moving toward camp by crawling. Snow covered the glacier in uneven ridges. Crevasses cut across the basin at intervals. Each had to be identified before crossing. The distance was measurable, but progress would be slow. There was no shelter available on the open glacier. Night temperatures would fall well below freezing. The descent had ended. The crossing had begun. I began moving across the glacier using my hands and uninjured leg. Each step required careful placement on firm snow or ice. Crevasses were partially hidden by thin snow bridges. A misjudged step could break the surface, leaving a drop of several meters. I tested every bridge with an ice tool before committing weight. Progress was measured in meters rather than strides. The broken leg was strapped to a makeshift splint from rope and ice tools. Even then, it dragged against snow and rock. Cold penetrated the splint. Movement generated minimal warmth. Frost collected on exposed gloves and face. The glacier was a mosaic of white and blue ice. Sunlight reflected sharply, but clouds occasionally muted the brightness. Wind continued steadily across the basin, moving small drifts of snow over ridges. Noise came only from shifting ice and occasional small avalanches far above. The terrain was silent in any other sense. I kept moving during the day, resting periodically to avoid fatigue. Each pause required positioning to avoid sliding. Sleep was limited to short rests on small patches of compacted snow. Night brought near-zero temperatures. I remained semi-conscious, conserving energy and monitoring the surface for dangerous shifts. Food was rationed carefully. Water came from melting snow with a small stove, fuel measured to last multiple days. Energy remained low, but essential movement continued. Every action had to be deliberate. Even small mistakes could result in falling into a hidden crevasse. Time became difficult to judge. The sun moved across the sky. Clouds changed shape. The glacier remained constant. Each section of the basin repeated similar patterns: ridges, crevasses, exposed ice. Distance to base camp was never clear until the landmark was reached. The crawl across the glacier was slow and unrelenting. Every meter gained required assessment, balance, and adjustment. Pain in the leg was constant but manageable. Cold and fatigue became additional companions. I continued toward the far edge of the basin, knowing that once the moraine was reached, movement over firmer ground would be possible. The glacier dictated pace. Survival required submission to its rhythm.